Okay, so as people know, I'm Diane, and I'm running for Congress because the world and our nation are facing an existential crisis. We have a president who, according to the Israeli press and U.S. military sources, has encouraged Netanyahu to launch a strike on Iran, which could plunge us into thermonuclear war. The entire European banking system is admitted to need at least 4 trillion euros in bailouts, and therefore what urgently needs to be done, number one, in the United States, is we have to reinstate FDR's Glass-Steagall Banking Act. We have to separate the commercial banks from the speculative banks and stop these bailouts. Number two, we have to restore the American system of national banking and credit as understood by Alexander Hamilton. That means no more Federal Reserve, and it means the ability to fund great projects such as the type that FDR built to get us out of the Depression. Specifically, I'm proposing the North American Water and Power Alliance, which was a project from the 60s supported by both Kennedys, launched by Senator Frank Moss of Utah, which would bring water from Alaska, where there is a massive runoff into the Arctic Ocean, down into the Great Lakes region, all the way to Arizona, New Mexico. This project would employ about 4 million people, many of them for 30 years. And had this been built in the 60s when it was proposed, all of the flooding and droughts and devastation of the extreme weather of last year would not have had the impact that it had. So these are the 3 things that I believe urgently must be done: a return to Glass-Steagall banking, a return to the national system of national banking and credit, and the construction of NAWAPA. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Jason Castle, and as Diane said, we are in dire times. But let me be clear, it was not a lack of Glass-Steagall that put us in these times. It was greed, short-sightedness, and corruption that put us in these times. My name is Jason Castle, and I'm running to be your next congressman. Thank you.
I think there's a bigger problem, however, which is that the American people feel disenfranchised, and that people don't use their authority to speak out at town hall meetings to confront their congressmen, that it actually isn't just the case that money is power. The population has a lot of power, and we have to mobilize people to use that power to change policy. But at any rate, that's my answer.
Here's what I'll say to you. Here's what's deeply troubling to me. It's troubling to me when I walk outside and I see pictures of our president with a Hitler mustache. That troubles me. It's troubling to me that we're calling for the impeachment of a president, where in this democracy, if you are very much against what the president is doing and the actions that he's taking, then run against him. As a matter of fact, by asking for the impeachment of the president, you yourself are tacitly supporting his re-election. So I thank you for that. But if you don't agree with his actions, run a candidate against him. I don't think that his actions in Libya were unconstitutional.
I will respond. If Obama succeeds in unleashing a thermonuclear war, he will kill people orders of magnitude more than Hitler. However, the mustache actually was put on Obama because of his health care plan, which seems to be modeled on the T4 useless eaters idea. And this is the fight over the Independent Payment Advisory Board. And by the way, I would support Walter Jones' HCR 107 because it is an impeachable offense for a nation to lead a country into war without authorization of the Congress. On the Independent Payment Advisory Board, the idea of having a group of people, statisticians, determine whether it is a worthwhile investment for someone to have health care, to get life-saving treatment that they need based on their age, their weight, if they smoke, and to make this decision now when we've spent $29 trillion on bailouts And to say that people who have nothing to do with the family, nothing to do with the doctors, are going to determine whether a person has a right to health care is a slippery slope which was brought up at the Nuremberg tribunals. And it is a question of what people think is the value of human life in this country.
Next time you get asked a question.
But I do believe that we need to learn from this crisis and put forth smart regulation to keep some of these derivatives perhaps from being created. The problem is too big just to say that Glass-Steagall is going to solve it. And I'm sure, you know, it's popular, clearly, from all the questions about it, to just say, well, Glass-Steagall was overturned essentially in 1999, and then shortly thereafter we had this economic crisis. No, we had this economic crisis because people were greedy, and they were corrupt, and they were short-sighted. We had this because they were gambling with our money. But let's not forget that some of those bets that were diversified actually survived this economic downturn because they didn't put all their eggs in one basket.
My question is mostly for Mr. Cassidy. You said you supported our conduct in Libya. What are your thoughts on Syria? Because my feeling is the U.S. has a lot more interest in countries that have oil than countries that don't have oil.
Yeah, I thought someone was going to ask about Syria. And let me be clear. A nuclear Iran is detrimental to Israel, it is detrimental to America, it is detrimental to the world community. But we need to speak with one voice out against these things. We had international support in Libya. We're trying to build that for Syria. It can't be the United States alone taking action. We can't do that. So what's going on in Syria is horrible. There is a madman in power. He is exterminating his people. But we need to get the world to commit. We can't carry that burden alone.
Well, first of all, I believe it was leaked to the New York Times that one of the reasons why Bob Gates left as defense secretary is that we did not have international support in Libya, that NATO put a fig leaf over it, but basically the whole operation was run by the United States, and it was an illegal and unconstitutional operation. Secondly, we heard this story before about Saddam Hussein. That worked out really well. We killed anywhere between 600,000 and 1 million Iraqi civilians, not to mention thousands of our own soldiers. And the point about Syria, this is empire. The transatlantic system is bankrupt. You have people in the City of London and Wall Street who would like nothing better than a major war. If we get involved in putting up buffer zones around Syria, we are in a head-on confrontation with Russia. The Russians have said so. The Chinese have said that they consider our massive upgrading of our bases in Australia and our moving of nuclear submarines all over the Pacific a reason why the Chinese may be considering changing their policy of no first use of nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, this is not in the U.S. media, but if you want to Google and look up what the Russians and Chinese are saying, I would recommend that you do it. These wars have nothing to do with Iran and Syria. There is no evidence that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. Nothing has changed there since 2003. That is publicly known. That is the content of the IAEA report. These wars are a product of a breakdown of a financial system. That's what should be addressed.
Next question. Good question.
What is your stance on the constitutionality of the National Defense Authorization Act?
The NDAA was signed by Obama on New Year's Eve. It allows for the military, anyone that they consider to be a so-called terrorist, to be detained indefinitely without trial, and therefore it is strictly unconstitutional and should be repealed.
Difficult question, I'm going to tell you, because we have detainees right now who are in Guantanamo Bay. We have individuals who we have denied rights to, and the reason that they are there is because the government doesn't know what to do with them. I don't think that there's a silver bullet that I can give you. I can tell you that we have gone so far down this path, down this rabbit hole, that simply repealing that piece of legislation is not going to solve the problem that we're in.
This is directed to you, Jason. There are 3 times and there are 3 pieces of legislation that you've taken the position that we've gone so far down this path that it's to a single payer, the NDAA and Glass-Steagall, that we've gone so far past that reinstating them or rescinding them won't do any good. Frankly, I find that to be intellectually dishonest and completely confusing. So could you please help me to understand how you have arrived at this? Once we've gone down this path, we can't fix the position.
I think the first time I used down the rabbit hole was just here.
It's the same thing.
No, what I'm, and let me be clear, because
I'd like that. So.
the right thing. I can only leave it there because they're complicated issues. I can't give you a silver bullet response. And if you think that there is a silver bullet to any one of these issues, and I'd be open to having a conversation with you so that you can educate me, because I don't know everything. But I will work my best for you.
All right, we have time for one more question before closing. What will you do in Washington if you win the election?
I'm assuming if we have another Katrina, you'll vote for
Emergency relief.
Emergency relief, which he didn't do. What else will you do?
You get to go first on this one, and then
And then we'll have
the 2-minute close-up.
And then we'll have our...
Well, when I win this election and go down to Washington, I'm going to be focused. First and foremost, we have to start by reaching across the aisle. We have to start by coalition building. We have to start by getting individuals to understand that we can pass pieces of legislation that transcend partisan ideology and will actually do things for the American people. We focus on jobs and the economy. We focus on, for me, one of the things I want to do, and I said it earlier, is I want to build coalitions between private industry and our community colleges and our trade organizations.
Well, when I win the election, I think what I'm going to do is get a bunch of buses, and everybody here is going to get on them, and we're going to go down to Washington, and we're going to get Glass-Steagall reenacted, and we're going to repeal the NDAA, and we're actually going to put an end to these insane policies of war and overthrowing every dictator on the planet because they offended us or said we should eat our broccoli like Bush Sr. And we're going to have to take emergency measures to save the country. And you can say that one congresswoman out of 435 may not be much, but one who is aggressive and determined to get the job done can recruit other people, because I happen to know there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who agree with what we're saying, and they're gutless. And they're under pressure from Wall Street, and they're under pressure from the president, and they won't take a stand. But a few people taking a stand and sticking their neck on the line will inspire other people to take a stand. And it will probably be the case that I will need backup from my base in the 5th District to go down there and get this done, but that would be my intention.